Section 10 of The Supernatural in Modern English Fiction by Dorothy Scarborough. This LibriVox recording's in the public domain, read by Ben Tucker. Chapter 5, Part 2. Spiritualism and Psychical Research. The influence of modern spiritualism and psychical research on the literature of supernaturalism has been marked, especially of late years. It would be inevitable that movements which interest so many persons, among them many of more than ordinary intelligence, should be reflected in fiction. These two aspects of the subject will be treated together, since they are closely allied. For though spiritualism is a form of religion and psychical research a new science, and so-called religion and so-called science are not always parallel, the lines of investigation here are similar. While spiritualism endeavors to get in touch with the spirits of the dead that the living may be comforted and enlightened, and psychical research attempts to classify the supposedly authentic cases of such communication, and in so much their methods of approach are different, yet the results may be discussed together. Hawthorne was interested in spiritualism as literary material, since a discussion of it is introduced in Blithedale Romance, and various passages in his notebooks treat of the matter, showing the fascination it had for him. Mrs. Elizabeth Stuart Phelps Ward, in addition to her fictional treatises of heaven, takes up spiritualism as well. In The Day of My Death, she gives a satiric account of the return of a spirit who says he is a lost soul tortured in hell. He doubtless deserves it, for he sticks the baby full of pins and ties it to a tree, and folds the clothes from the wash in the shape of corpses. He is still interested in this life, however, since he requests a piece of squash pie. In Kentucky's Ghost, she depicts a spirit actuated by definite malice. In the previous story, 7 mediums tell a man that he will die at a certain day and hour, but he lives cheerfully on. William Dean Howells has given a study in his usually kindly satire and sympathetic seriousness of the phenomena of spiritualism and mesmerism in the undiscovered country. Dr. Boynton, a mistaken zealot, holds seances assisted by his daughter, a delicate, sensitive girl, who is physically prostrated after each performance, and begs her father to spare her. She acts as a medium, where the usual effects of rapping, table levitation, and so forth take place, where spirit hands wave in the air and messages, grave and jocular, are delivered. The characterization is handled with skill to bring out the sincerity of each person involved in the web of superstition and false belief. And Howells shows real sympathy with each, the scoffers as well as the misguided fanatics. It is only when the doctor looks death in the face that he realizes his error and seeks to know by faith in the Bible the truths of the far country of the soul. Hamlin Garland has shown considerable interest in spiritualism in his fiction. He refuses to commit himself as to his own opinion of the question, but he has written 2 novels dealing with it: The Tyranny of the Dark and The Shadow World. The former is considerably like Howells' novel, for here also a young girl is made the innocent victim of fanatics, her mother and a preacher who has fallen in love with her. She is made to take part in spiritualistic manifestations, whether as a victim of fraud or as a genuine medium, the author leaves in doubt. When the girl casts him off, the preacher kills himself, that he may come into closer communication with her after death than he has been able to do in life. Richard Harding Davis has contributed a volume with a similar plot, The Exploitation of an Innocent, and of course, Beautiful Girl by Fanatics in Vera the Medium. Here the girl is more than half aware that she is a fraud, and in her last seance, at the conclusion of which she is to be carried triumphantly away by her lover, the New York District Attorney, she dramatically confesses her deception. As a sympathy-getter, she pleads that she was very lonely, that because her grandfather and mother were mediums, she had been cut off from society. "I used to play around the kitchen stove with Pocahontas and Alexander the Great, and Martin Luther lived in our china closet." David Belasco's The Return of Peter Grimm, drama and novel, is based upon spiritualistic manifestations. We are told that the envelope, or shadow self, of a sleeper has been photographed by means of radio photography. When a certain part of the shadow body is pricked with a pin, as the cheek, the corresponding portion of the sleeper's body is seen to bleed. Peter Grimm comes back from the other world to direct the actions of the living, and though at first only a child sees him, for children are the best sensitives, save animals, eventually the adults recognize him also, and yield to his guidance. Spiritualism enters directly or indirectly into many works of fiction of late years. Whether people believe in it or not, they are thinking and writing about it. The subject receives its usual humorous turn in various stories, as Nelson Lloyd's The Last Ghost in Harmony, the story of a spectre who complains of the scientific unimaginativeness of his village, saying that though he had entreated the spooks to hold out for a little while, as he had heard spiritualism was headed that way and would bring about a revival of interest in ghosts, the spirits all got discouraged and quit the place. And we recall Sandy's mournful comment to Mark Twain's Captain Stormfield that he wished there was something in that miserable spiritualism so he could send word back to the folks. The proceedings of the Psychical Research Society have a twofold association with literature, for not only have various modern novels and stories been inspired by such material, but the instances recorded are similar in many cases to the classical ghost stories. Lacey Collison Morley, in his Greek and Roman ghost stories, says, "There are a number of stories of the passing of souls, which are, curiously, like some of those collected by the Psychical Research Society in the fourth book of Gregory the Great's Dialogues." The double source of many modern stories may be found by a comparative study of Collison Morley's book and Meyer's Human Personality, while G.H. Gerald's volume, The Grateful Dead, introduces recent instances that are like classical stories. The inability of the soul to have rest in the other world if its body was unburied, as held by the ancients, is reflected in Gothic romance, Elizabethan drama, as well as in the classics. The ghost of Jack, whom Peele tells us about, is a case of a ghost coming back to befriend his undertaker. From these comparisons, it would appear that there is something inherently true to humanity in these beliefs, for the revenge ghost and the Grateful Dead have appeared all along the line. Perhaps human personality is largely the same in all lands and all times, and ghosts have the same elemental emotions, however much they may have acquired a veneer of modernity. There are many instances of the compact ghost, the spirit who returns just after death in accordance with a promise made in life, to manifest himself to some friend or to some skeptic. Algernon Blackwood gives several stories based on that theme. One a curious case where the ghost is so lifelike his friend does not dream he is not the living man, and assigns him to a bedroom. Later he is invisible, yet undoubtedly present, for his heavy breathing, movements of the covers, and impress on the bed are beyond dispute. Afterwards, by Fred C. Smale, shows a ghost returning to attend a neighborhood club. When his name is called by mistake, he takes part on the program, speaking through the lips of a young man present, who goes off in a cataleptic trance. During this coma, the youth, who is ignorant of music, gives a technical discussion of notation, analyzing diatonic semitones and discussing the note a nightingale trills on. When he wakes, he says he has felt a chill and a touch. Alice Brown relates a story of a lover who promised to come to his sweetheart at the moment of death, but who, like Emmaus in the Bible, runs before he is ready, and keeps his ghostly tryst while the rescuers bring him back to life. He hasn't really been drowned at all. A recent novelette by Frances Hodgson Burnett, called The White People, has psychical phenomena for its central interest. A little child, born after her father's tragic death, and when her dying mother is conscious of his spiritual presence, grows up with a strange sensitiveness to manifestations from the other world. Her home is on a lonely estate in Scotland, so that her chief companionship is with the white people, the spirits of the dead, though she does not so recognize them. Her playmate is wee brown Elsbeth, who has been murdered hundreds of years before, and she is able to see the dead hover near their loved ones wherever she goes. So when she comes to realize what a strange vision is hers, she has no horror of death. And when her lover dies, she does not grieve, but waits to see him stand smiling beside her as in life. The theme of the story is the nearness of the dead to the living, the thin texture of the veil that separates the two worlds. Basil King tells a poignant story of a soul trying vainly to return in body to right a wrong done in life, but unable to accomplish her purpose by physical means. At last she effects it by impressing the mind of a living woman, who carries out the suggestion psychically given. One of the most effective recent accounts of a spirit's return to Earth to influence the life of the living, to give messages or to control destiny, is in Ellen Glasgow's The Shadowy Third. Here the ghost of a child, a little girl whom her stepfather has done to death for her money, returns to cause his death in an unusual way. She throws her little skipping rope carelessly on the stairway, where he must trip up in it, when he sees her phantom figure in front of him in the gloom, so to fall headlong to his death. This is an impressive revenge ghost. Henry James based his ghost story, The Turn of the Screw, on an incident reported to the Psychical Society of a spectral old woman corrupting the mind of a child. The central character in Arnold Bennett's novel The Ghost is a spectre, one of the most rabid revenge ghosts in literature, who is eaten up with jealousy lest the woman he loved in life shall care for someone else. Algernon Blackwood uses much psychical material in his numberless stories of the supernatural, often mentioning the work of the Society, and Andrew Lang has contributed much to the subject. Arthur Machen has just published a collection of stories of war apparitions that are interesting psychical specimens called the Bowmen. In one story in the volume, he shows us how a contemporary legend may be built up, since from a short piece of fiction written by him has evolved the mass of material relating to the angels at Mons. One tale is a story of the supernatural intervention of St. George and his army to drive back the Germans and save the hour for the Allies, while another describes the vision of a soldier wounded in battle defending his comrades, who sees the long-dead heroes of England file past him to praise him for his valor. The minister gives him wine to drink, and his voice was hushed, for as he looked at the minister the fashion of his vesture was changed. He was all in armor, if armor be made of starlight, of the rose of dawn, and of sunset fires, and he lifted up a great sword of flame. Full in the midst, his cross of red, triumphant Michael brandished, and trampled the apostate's pride. Another case of collective apparitions is the experience of a soldier, wounded in battle, who tells of strange fighters who have come in to aid the English. He thinks they are some of the tribesmen that Britain employs. But from his descriptions the minister knows that they are the long-dead Greeks who have arisen to take part in the struggle which their modern descendants are reluctant to share. These stories are only a few among the many instances of supernaturalism in fiction traceable to the influence of the war. Certain volumes of ghost stories have appeared, claiming to be not fiction but fact, accounts of actual apparitions, seen and snapshotted. This sort of problematic fiction is not new, however, since Defoe long ago published one of the best of the kind, the story of Mrs. Veal, who appeared to her friend Mrs. Bargrave, and conversed with her, gravely telling her that heaven is much like the descriptions in a certain religious book written shortly before that. She seems very realistic, with her dress of newly scoured silk, which her friend rubs between her fingers, and her lifelike conversation. This story has usually been regarded as one of Defoe's lies like truth, but recent evidence leads one to believe that it is a reportorial account of a ghost story current at the time, which missed being reported to the Society for Psychical Research merely because the organization did not exist then. The modern stories that stridently claim to be real lack the interest in many instances that Mrs. Veal is able to impart, and in most cases the reader loses his taste for that sort of fiction because it is rammed down his throat for fact. They don't impress one either as fact or as fiction. One of the most interesting aspects of the literature relating to psychic matters in recent years is the number of books that claim to be spirit-inspired. These instances of psychography are not what we might expect immortals to indict, but it appears that there must be a marked decrease of intelligence when one reaches the other world. The messages sent back by dead genius lack the master style, even lacking that control over spelling and grammar which low earthbound editors consider necessary. But perhaps the spirits of the great grow tired of being made messenger boys and show their resentment by literary strikes. Anita Silvani has published several volumes that she claims were written while she was in a semi-trance, which statement no reader will doubt. Her accommodating dictator furnishes illustrations for her stuff, as well, for she says she would have inner visions of the scenes described as if a diorama passed before her. These romances of three worlds are quite peculiar productions. The inner voices asked her in advance not to read any literature on theosophy or spiritualism or the supernatural, since they wished her mind to be free from any previous bias. Mrs. Elsa Barker is another of these literary mediums, for she has put out 2 volumes of letters in narrative form, which she makes affidavit were dictated to her by a disembodied spirit, the ghost of the late Judge Hatch of California. She states that while she was sitting in her room in Paris one day, her hand was violently seized, a pencil thrust into it, and the automatic writing began. Mrs. Campbell Praed is another of these feminine stenographers for spooks, but like the rest she has left nothing that could well be included in a literary anthology. These spirit writers tell us of life after death, but nothing that is a contribution to existing ignorance on the subject. According to Judge Hatch, whose post-mortem pen name is X, the present war has its parallel in a conflict of spirits, and the astral world is in dire confusion because of overcrowding, so that the souls of the slain must go through torments and struggle with demons. The most recent instance of psychography comes to us by way of the Ouija board from St. Louis, the authenticity of which is vouched for by Mr. Casper Yost of the editorial staff of the Globe Democrat. But if the Ouija board dictated the stories and plays, giving the name of Patience Worth as the spirit author, and if Mrs. Curran took them down, why does Mr. Yost appear as the author? Patience Worth says that she lived a long time ago. Mr. Yost insists that her language is Elizabethan, but it seems rather a curious conglomeration, unlike any Elizabethan style I am familiar with. She has written stories, lyrics, a long drama, and other informal compositions, a marvelous output when one considers the slow movements of the Ouija board. The communications seem to have human interest and a certain literary value, though they bring us no messages from the Elizabethan section of eternity. Automatic writing appears in The Martian by Du Maurier, where the spirit from Mars causes Barty Jocelyn in his sleep to write books impossible to him in his waking hours. The type has been parodied by John Kendrick Bangs in his Enchanted Typewriter, which machine worked industriously, recording telegraphic dispatches from across the Styx. The invisible operator gives his name as Jim Boswell. The writer states, "The substance of the following pages have evolved itself between the hours of midnight and 4 o'clock, during a period of 6 months, from a typewriting machine standing in a corner of my library, manipulated by unseen hands." It is astonishing how many ghosts are trying to break into print these days. And after all, what do the poor things get out of it? No royalties, scant praise, and much ridicule when their style fails to come up to specifications. Interesting psychical material is found in a new volume of plays by Theodore Dreiser. He gives curious twists to the unearthly, as in The Blue Sphere, where a shadow and a fast mail are among the dramatis personae, typifying the fate idea of the old drama. The shadow lures a child monstrosity out onto the railway track after he has caused the elders to leave the gate open, and the train, made very human, kills the child. The psychic effects in the Dark are even more peculiar, the characters including various spirits, a wraith, and a ghost with red eyes who circle round the human beings and force them to discover a murder that has been committed. The effect of supernatural manifestation on animals is brought out here, in the bellowing of the bull and the howling of the dogs as the ghosts pass by. In a spring recital, troops of nymphs and hamadryads, fauns, clouds of loathsome spirits of hags and wastrels, persistences of fish, birds, and animals, various living and newly dead spirits wandering in from the street. The ghost of an English minister of St. Giles, who died in 1631, a monk of the Thebaid, of date 300, and 3 priests of Isis of 2840 B.C., enter to hear the organist play. He is unaware that anybody is hearing his music save the 4 human beings who have happened in. These dramas, of course, are purely literary plays, impossible of presentation on the stage, and in their curious character show a likeness to some of the late German supernaturalism, such as the plays of August Strahm. They show in an extreme form the tendency toward psychic material that the American and English drama has evidenced lately. Life after death. Mankind is immensely interested in heaven and hell, though he knows but little concerning these places. But man is a born traveler, and gives much thought to distant countries, whether he definitely expects to go there or not. This interest is no new thing, for classical mythology is full of doleful accounts of the afterlife. The early English stage represented heaven and hell in addition to the earth. An Elizabethan drama shows many references to the underworld, with a strong Senecan influence. There are especially frequent allusions to certain famous sufferers in Hades, as Ixion, Tantalus, Sisyphus, and Titius. Modern English fiction has likewise been influenced by the epic supernaturalism, reflecting the heaven and hell of Dante and Milton. Yet, as in his own thinking, each person lays out a celestial city for himself, and pictures his own inferno to fit his ideas of mercy and justice, peopling them with appropriate beings, changing and coloring the conceptions of Bunyan, for instance, to suit his own desires. So it is in fiction. Some think of heaven and hell as definite places, while to others they are states of mind. To some, the devil is as real as in the darky folk song, where up stepped the devil wid his iron wooden shovel, tearing up the earth wid his big toe-nail. While to others he is an iconoclastic new thought. Heaven and hell have been treated in every conceivable way in English fiction. Conventionally, symbolically, humorously, and satirically, so that one may choose the type he prefers. There are enough kinds to go around. Among the portrayers of the traditional heaven and hell, Mrs. Elizabeth Stuart Phelps Ward is prominent. Her works on contemporary immortality are said to have had a tremendous vogue in the period following the Civil War, when death had claimed so many that the living were thinking of the other world more than of this. Her pictures of heaven in Gates Ajar are comforting, for she assures to each person his own dearest wish and fulfillment, to the ambitious youth his books, to the young girl her piano, and to the small child her ginger snaps instead of earthly bread and butter. In the gates between, the physician, suddenly killed, finds himself embarrassed by immortality. He doesn't know how to adjust himself to eternity, and at first brings many of Earth's problems with him. In the third of the series, The Gates Beyond, she describes a very material, yet spiritual heaven. Bodies are much like those on Earth, not vaporous projections. There are museums, hospitals, universities, telephones, concerts, and all up-to-date improvements and conveniences. The dead woman discovers that she remembers what she read on Earth, takes pleasure in simple things such as the smell of mignonette, hears the birds sing a Te Deum, while a brook and a bird sing a duet, and the leaves are also vocal. There is a universal language which must be learned by each soul, and heaven holds all sorts of occupations, material, mental, and spiritual. She says that near Earth are many earth-bound spirits, occupied in low and coarse and selfish ways, who lack spiritual momentum to get away. They loved nothing, lived for nothing, believed in nothing. They cultivated themselves for nothing but the earth, which may be compared with the state of the souls on Fifth Avenue, described by Granville Barker. Mrs. Ward's pictures of heaven may seem sentimental and conventional to us today, yet to be appreciated they must be considered in relation to the religious thought of her time. She represented a reaction against the rigid theology, the stern concepts of an older generation than her own, and she wished to make heaven more homelike. She did have an influence in her day, as may be illustrated by a remark from a sermon recently delivered by a New York pastor, that the reading of her books had exerted a great influence over him, that they made heaven over for him. Mrs. Oliphant is another of the conductors of fictive Cook's tours through heaven and hell, after the fashion started by Dante and Milton, and modernized by Mrs. Ward. She devotes volumes to describing the future worlds and their relation to mortal destiny. One story tells of a soul that comes back from purgatory to be comforted by the old minister and sent away happy. Another is the account of a spirit returning from heaven to right a wrong that her husband is doing another. Still another gives the experiences of a woman who is distressed when she finds herself in heaven because she has hidden her will, and her young niece is thereby left penniless, but she asks advice of various celestial authorities, and finally succeeds in returning to earth and righting matters. A Beleaguered City is a peculiar story of a French town besieged by the dead, who drive out the inhabitants because of their cruelty towards some nuns. A strange gloom pervades the place. The cathedral bell rings of themselves, and flaming signs appear on the church doors, till after much penance the citizens are allowed to return, and the invading hosts from eternity withdraw. In one story, Mrs. Oliphant gives her ideas of heaven as a place of light, of rest, of joy, of service, where the great angel Pain helps the souls to wisdom. In a counterpicture, she shows hell, the world of the unhappy dead, where are cruelty, selfishness, suffering, a world filled with tears that drip from earth. Yet it is a hell as well regulated, as thoroughly disciplined as a German municipality, with various punishments, the most terrible being a lecture platform from which are delivered eternal addresses. These would-be realistic stories of heaven and hell somehow leave the reader cold, after Dante and Milton, however much one may feel the sincerity of the authors. Heaven and hell are such vast provinces that one cannot chart them in imagination sufficiently to grasp somebody else's concept and story. Other stories of life after death, given from the spirit angle rather than from the mortal point of view, as in most ghost stories, are among the recent types of supernaturalism. Alice Brown has several stories of the kind. in one showing a woman who comes to tell her friend not to be afraid of dying, because there is much like here, and another symbolic of the power of love to come back even from the pit of blackness after death. Olivia Howard Dunbar's The Shell of Sense gives the psychosis of a woman who cannot go to heaven because she is jealous of her husband. She sees the form of the wind, hears the roses open in the garden, and senses many things unknown to human beings, yet is actuated by very human motives. Catherine Butler suggests that death must be a painless process, and the afterlife much like mortality, since the man doesn't realize that he is dead but attempts to go about his affairs as usual. The symbolic treatment of the theme of life after death is more effective and shows more literary art than the conventional pictures of Mrs. Wards and Mrs. Oliphants. No human vocabulary is able to describe immortality of glory or despair. Hence it is more effective merely to suggest the thought, by allegory or symbolism. Hawthorne gives us a symbolic morality in The Celestial Railroad, where he pictures the road between heaven and hell, drawing on Bunyan's imagery to describe the landscape and characters. Apollyon is engineer and emits realistic blasts of smoke. Eugene Field tells of a mother just entering heaven who asks an angel where she may find her little baby, dead long ago, to whom the angel whispers that she is the babe, grown to maturity in paradise. Julian Hawthorne's Lovers in Heaven is a symbolic picture of the afterlife, where a man just dead goes in search of the beloved he lost long before. He sees her on the far slope of a heavenly hill, but before he can reach her, the devil appears to him in his own double. The Satan of mine own self, the part of me wherein God had no share. This is a quite modern concept of diabolism, but love struggles to save him, and he resists his evil self. Arenzaman by Anita Silvani shows lurid pictures of the world to come. In the Inferno of the Dark Star, the soul sees the attendant genii of his life, each symbolizing some passion of his nature. There are horrible astral birds and beasts, and combinations unknown to mortal biology, while vultures hover overhead and a foul astral odor fills the air. The spirits are of peculiar substance, for they fight and slay each other, some being torn to pieces. The soul is supposed to progress toward the silver, and later the golden star. Marie Corelli's Romance of Two Worlds is a queer production, preaching the doctrine of psychical electricity, which is to be a sort of wonder-working magician, and in other novels she gives theories of radioactivity, a theosophical cure-all for this world and the next. A Vision of Judgment by H.G. Wells is a satire on man's judgment of sin and character and of destiny after death, showing the pettiness and folly of Ahab, proud of his sins, and the hypocrisy of a so-called saint, conceited over his self-torture. At last the two sat side by side, stark of all illusions, in the shadow of the robe of God's charity like brothers. The picture of God and the throne vanish, and they behold a land austere and beautiful, with the enlightened souls of men and clean bodies all around him. This symbolic allegory setting forth the shallowness of human judgment as set against God's clarity of vision and charity of wisdom is like Oscar Wilde's The House of Judgment, a terrible piece of symbolism expressed in a few words. A soul who has been altogether evil comes at last before God to be judged. God speaks to him of his vileness, his cruelty, his selfishness, to all of which the soul makes confession of guilt. And God, closing the book of the man's life, said, "Surely I will send thee into hell, even unto hell will I send thee." And the man cried out, "Thou canst not." And God said to the man, "Wherefore can I not send thee to hell, and for what reason?" "Because in hell I have always lived," answered the man. And there was silence in the house of judgment. And after a space God spake and said to the man, "Seeing that I may not send thee into hell, I will send thee into heaven. Surely unto heaven I will send thee." And the man cried out, "Thou canst not." And God said to the man, "Wherefore can I not send thee unto heaven, and for what reason?" "Because never and in no place have I been able to imagine it," answered the man. And there was silence in the house of judgment. The fact that a man's thoughts make his heaven or his hell is brought out in a recent book, The Case of John Smith, by Elizabeth Bisland, where the central character receives a revelation while working at his typewriter one day. The message says, "O peevish and perverse, how know you that you have not died elsewhere, and that this is not the heaven which there you dreamed? How know you that your hell may not lie only in not recognizing this as heaven? In many recent examples of allegory and symbolism, we get suggestive impressions of the other life, of the soul's realities. Some of these have the inevitable words, the fatal phrases that seem to penetrate into the real heaven and hell for us. The most remarkable instance of symbolic treatment of the afterlife is in Souls on Fifth by Granville Barker, where the spirit of the dead are represented as unable to rise above the level of the ideals they had held in life, and drift endlessly up and down the avenue, some in the form of tarnished guilt, some with white plague spots of cowardice, or blisters of slanderous thoughts, some horny with selfishness, some with lines of secret cruelty. There are few squares, but mostly irregular shapes of sin. The purely humorous treatment of life after death, the comic pictures of heaven and hell, are of a piece with the humorous treatment of other phases of supernaturalism, and are distinctly modern. The flippant way in which sacred subjects are handled is a far cry from the heaven and hell of Dante and Milton. Modern writers slap the devil on the back, make fun of the archangels, and appeal to the ridiculous in one-time sacred situations, with a freedom that would have made the Puritans gasp. For instance, St. Peter has been the butt of so many jokes that he is really hackneyed. The Flying Dutchman, whom Brander Matthews introduces in his primer of imaginary geography, and who says that the Wandering Jew is the only person he can have any satisfactory chats with now, speaks of knowing Charon, who keeps the ferry across the Styx. I met him last month, and he was very proud of his new electric launch with its storage battery. He says that hell is now lighted by electricity, and that Pluto has put in all the modern improvements. John Kendrick Bangs, in his Houseboat on the Styx, brings together the shades of many illustrious persons: Queen Elizabeth, Walter Raleigh, Socrates, Xantippe, Captain Kidd, and many others. From them we get pictures of life after death, and of their characteristic attitudes towards it, and each other. He continues the situation in The Pursuit of the Houseboat, as the redoubtable Captain Kidd makes off with the ship and the ladies, leaving all the men behind. But they follow the bold buccaneer, and after exciting adventures reaching from the Styx to Paris, they recapture the fair. Carolyn Wells has recently given us a Styx River anthology. In modern stories, we visit the comic devil on his native heath, see him in his own hometown, as in previous chapters we discussed him in his appearances on Earth. Kipling's The Last of the Stories shows us the Hades of literary endeavor, the limbo of lost characters, presided over by a large and luminous devil of fluent tongue. Kipling recognizes many persons from fiction, and sees various tortures in process. All do obeisance to the shade of Rabelais, the master. Kipling is terrified by the characters he himself brought into being, and begs to hide his face from them. F. Marion Crawford gives us another glimpse of literary eternity, where the spirits of learned personages meet and discuss life. A recent poem describes a meeting and dialogue in Hades between Chaucer and Cressida. It is possible Bernard Shaw, who would be most liable to prosecution by the devil for lèse majesté, for in Man and Superman, Mine Host of the Pit is represented as an affable gentleman who tries to make hell attractive to his guests, and exercises not the least constraint on their movements. They are free to leave him and go to heaven if they like. He only warns them that they will find it tiresome. He converses with Don Juan and a couple of other blasé mortals, uttering Shavian iconoclasms with an air of courteous boredom. He is very different from the sinister personage of conventional fiction. Mark Twain has given humorous views of heaven in his extract from Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven. A bluff, hearty old salt finds the celestial regions very different from the traditional descriptions of them. The heavenly citizens are a polite set, wishful for him to do what he likes, yet he tires of the things he thought paradise consisted of, lays aside his harp and crown, and takes his wings off for greater ease. He finds his pleasures in the meeting of an occasional patriarch or prophet, and the excitement of the entry of a converted bartender from Jersey City. He changes his views on many points, saying, for instance, "I begin to see a man's got to be in his own heaven to be happy." And again, happiness ain't a thing in itself, it's only a contrast with something that ain't pleasant. Again, Sandy, his friend, says, "I wish there was something in that miserable spiritualism so we could send the folks word about it." Something of the same combination of humor and earnestness is found in Nicholas Vachel Lindsay's poem, General William Booth Enters into Heaven. Booth led boldly with his big bass drum, "Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?" The saints smiled gravely as they said, "He's come. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?" Bass drums. Walking lepers followed, rank on rank, lurching bravos from the ditches dank, drabs from the alleyways and drug fiends pale, mind still passion-ridden, soul power frail, vermin-eaten saints with mouldy breath, unwashed legions with the ways of death. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Reverently sung, no instruments. And while Booth halted by the curb for prayer, he saw his master through the flag-filled air. Christ came gently with a robe and crown for Booth the soldier, while the crown knelt down. He saw King Jesus, they were face to face, and he knelt a-weeping in that holy place. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? This combination of realism with idealism, of homely details with celestial symbolism, is also seen in another recent poem, The Man with the Pigeons by William Rose Benet, who shows us two pictures, the first of a tramp in Madison Square Garden who loves the pigeons and has them ever clustering around him in devotion. The next is of heaven, with the celestial gardens, where among the gold-haired angels the old tramp stands at home, still wearing his rusty shoes and battered derby hat. The quaint commingling of fancy and fact reminds us of Hanel's dreams of heaven in Hauptmann's Hanel, where the schoolmaster is confused with the angels, and heaven and the sordid little room are somehow united. H.G. Wells, in A Wonderful Visit, shows us another side of the picture, for he draws an angel down and lets him tell the citizens of the earth of the land he comes from. I make no attempt in this discussion to decide concerning the personality of angels, whether they are the spirits of the just made perfect, or pre-Adamite creatures that never were and never could be man. For the present purpose, they are simply angels. This book of Wells is an example of the satiric treatment of heaven and earth that constitutes a special point of importance in the modern supernaturalism. It is a social satire and a burlesque on the formal and insincere manifestations of religion. A vicar takes a pot-shot at what he supposes is a rare bird, seeing a rainbow flash in the sky. But instead an angel comes tumbling down with a broken wing. This thrusts him down upon the vicar as a guest for some time, and introduces complications in the village life. The parishioners do not believe in angels save in stained glass windows or in church on Sunday, and they make life difficult for the vicar and his guest. The angel shows a human sense of humor, that quaint philosophy of the incongruous, which is the basis of all true humor, and his naive comments on earthly conventions, his smiling wonder at the popular misconceptions in regard to his heaven, to which he is surprised to learn that mortals are thought to go, since he says he has never seen any there, make him a lovable character. But village custom compels him to fold his shining wings under a coat till he looks like a hunchback, put boots on so that he has hoofs like a hippogriff, as he plaintively says to the vicar, and he finds conformity to convention a painful process. The novel ends sadly, symbolizing the world's stupid harshness, for the angel is sent away from the village as unworthy to live among the people, and his heart is almost broken. The same type of humor and satire may be found in James Stephen's The Demigods, and in Anatole France's The Revolt of the Angels. Stephen's novel contains an insert of a short story of heaven previously published, which depicts a preliminary skirmish in heaven over a coin a corpse has had left in his hand and has taken to eternity with him. In each novel, several angels come tumbling down from heaven and take up earthly life as they find it, engaging in affairs not considered angelic. Stevens, in addition to the two fighting celestials, gives us an archangel, a seraph, and a cherub. There is in both stories a certain embarrassment over clothes, the fallen ones arriving in a state of nudity, the necessity for donning earthly garments, the removal of the wings, and the adaptation to human life furnish complication and interest, with the added feminine element, though Stephen's novel is not marred by the unclean imaginings of Anatole France. The revolters in the French novel take up Parisian life, while Stevens's angelic trio join an itinerant tinker and his daughter, who are journeying aimlessly about, accompanied by a cart and a sad-eyed philosopher, an ass. They engage in activities and joys not conventionally archangelic, such as smoking corncob pipes, eating cold potatoes, and, when necessary, stealing the potatoes. The contrasts between heavenly ideas and Irish tramp life are inimitable. At last, when the three, having decided to go back to heaven, don their wings and crowns and say goodbye, the cherub turns back for one more word of farewell with Mary. Seeing her tears over his going, he tears his shiny wings to shreds and casts them from him, electing to stay on earth with the tinker's cart for the sake of love. It is really quite a demigod-like thing to do. Unlike France's book, which is a blasting satire on religion, these two English novels are amusing, with a certain measure of satire, yet with a whimsicality that does not antagonize. France's angels remain on Earth and become more corrupt than men, and Wells's wonderful visitor is banished from the village as an undesirable alien. Stevens's archangel and seraph go back to heaven after their vacation, while the cherub turns his back on immortal glory rather than break a woman's heart. In all three of these books, we notice the same leveling tendency shown in characterization of the angels that we have observed heretofore in the case of ghosts and devils, werewolves, and witches. The angels are human, with charming personality and a piquant sense of humor, whose attempts to understand mortal conventions reveal the essential absurdity of earthly ideas in many instances. The three taken together constitute an interesting case of literary parallelism, and it would be gratifying to discover whether France was influenced by Wells and Stevens, or Stevens by Wells and France. But in any event, Wells can prove a clear alibi as to imitation, since his novel appeared a number of years before the others. The possible inspiration for all of these in Byron's Heaven and Earth suggests an interesting investigation. A more recent story, The Ticket of Leave Angel, brings an angel down to a New York apartment where he has peculiar experiences and illustrates a new type of angelic psychology. The tendency to satirize immortality has crept even into poetry, for in a recent volume by Rupert Brooke there are several satiric studies. One entitled Uncertain Proceedings of the Psychical Research Society ridicules the idea that spirits would return to Earth to deliver trivial messages attributed to them, and another, Heaven, is a vitriolic thrust at the hope of a better life after death, sneering at it with unpleasant imagery. One of the recent instances of satiric pictures of the hereafter is Lord Dunsany's The Glittering Gate, a one-act drama where Bill and Jim, two burglars, crack the gate of heaven to get in. Sardonic laughter sounds while they are engaged in the effort to effect an entrance and wondering what heaven will be like. Bill thinks that his mother will be there. I don't know if they want a good mother in there who would be kind to the angels and sit and smile at them when they sing and soothe them if they were cross. Suddenly, Jim, they won't have brought me up against her, will they? Jim, it would be just like them to, very like them. When the glittering gate of heaven swings open and the two toughs enter eagerly, they find nothing. Absolutely nothing but empty space, and the sardonic laughter sounds in their ears. Bill cries out, "It is just like them, very like them." Was not this suggested by Rupert Brooke's poem Failure? In the stories treating satirically or humorously of the future life, we find the purpose and reality to be to image this life by illustration of the other. Eternity is described in order that we may understand time a little better. Angels and devils are made like men, to show mortal potentialities either way. The absurdities of mankind are illustrated as seen by angel eyes, the follies as satirized by devils. The tendency now is to treat supernatural life humorously, satirically, or symbolically, rather than with the conventional methods of the past. Commonplace treatment of great subjects is liable to be unsatisfactory, and any serious treatment other than symbolically simple of heaven or hell seems flat after Dante and Milton. In considering these various types of stories dealing with supernatural life, whether continued beyond the mortal span on Earth, renewed by reincarnation, or taken up in another world after death, we find that several facts seem to appear with reference to the type chosen for treatment by men as distinct from women, and vice versa. So far as my search has gone, I have found no instance in English literature where a woman has used either the motif of the Wandering Jew or the elixir of life. I do not say that no such instances exist, but I have not found them. Carmen Silva is the only woman I know of at all who has taken up the characterization of the Wandering Jew. On the other hand, women write often of heaven, most of the stories of conventional ideas of heaven being by women. Where men have pictured heaven or hell, they have done it for the most part humorously, satirically, or symbolically. They seem to curve around the subject rather than to approach it directly. Yet, where it is a question of continuing life here in this world, by means of an elixir or other method, or as an ever-living being like the Jew, men have used the theme frequently. Since fiction does reflect our thought life and our individual as well as racial preferences, the conclusions that might be drawn, if one were sure of their basis, would be interesting. Can it be that men are more deeply interested in this life on earth and cling to it in thought more tenaciously than women, and that women are more truly citizens of the other world? Are men skeptical of the existence of any but a satiric or symbolic heaven, or merely doubtful of reaching there? End of chapter 5.